Welcome back, everybody. I wanted to welcome you to the keynote. Just a brief introduction for everyone. Our first keynote, the keynote for today is going to be G.Watts. We all know him from the Agile Mastery series, like Scrum Mastery, Product Mastery. I didn't know about Team Mastery, but I think I must go on Amazon and find the book. He's also a leadership coach and co-creator of Organic Agility. He coaches leadership teams and on developing resilient, coherent structure within their organizations. So, I've known about Jeff's work for years, and I'm really interested to hear what he's going to be saying about in his keynote about standardized autonomy, self-balancing or self-organization with organizational alignment. Because I'm working at a huge organization at the bank, right? And it's a huge challenge to get the balance right, to not to have too much hierarchy and processes versus the autonomy that's needed to adjust the teams. So basically, I'm inviting you to this talk, after which we'll have a Q&A session. So during the talk, please write down any questions you might have on the Gather channel. Or Slack. Actually, you have the main ping channel in Slack. Please write all the questions in there. I will be taking them from that, and I'll be asking them to Jeff afterwards. Jeff also has one question for you for this discussion in smaller groups, but I'll tell you that at the very end of our Q&A session, so that you'll have 15 minutes to talk about it at the end. Okay, without much further ado, let's go. The first keynote for today, G.Watts.
Okay, hi, G.Watts here. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me. It's brilliant to be here. Obviously, I'd much prefer to be there with you in person than stuck in my lovely shed. But this is where we are still. And there are obviously advantages to this. I get to speak to so many more of you without increasing my carbon footprint and your carbon footprint. So that's good. We should have some time for questions at the end. So feel free to put them in the chat or store them up ready for the last 10, 15 minutes or so. I'm here to talk to you about standardized autonomy. Now, I'm a little bit excited, but obviously a little bit nervous, because this is some of the latest thinking. This is some of the latest learning that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And it's around some of the more tricky aspects of organizational change, organizational culture. Some people might call it agile at scale or enterprise agile. I won't, and I might come back onto why I won't later on. But over the last 20 years or so, I've been lucky enough to work with all kinds of organizations all over the world. And one of the biggest challenges I've seen overall, without question, and I would say one that hasn't really been completely answered yet, is how to balance the competing factors of the autonomy that's required for an agile way of working with the greater alignment that we need, especially in our larger organizations, especially when we get outside of the one team dynamic and into that wider organization. Now, you know that autonomy is a crucial part of agility. You know that. And agility is absolutely essential to working in these complex, fast-changing, uncertain domains, this whole VUCA thing. I'm sure you've heard of that acronym, those kinds of environments. But we can't take autonomy too far. If you just think about one team, for example, if we let every individual in that team go completely autonomous, then we've potentially got people pulling in different directions. They could be undermining each other. They could be compromising each other. They could be duplicating effort. And the same is true at the team of teams level. All sorts of dysfunctions and inefficiencies are possible. But our other problem is we can't standardize, because if we standardize, then we treat everyone as if they've got the same challenges. They've got the same needs. They're in the same context. And we know that even within one team, that's unlikely, let alone a department or a whole organization. So I'm here to tell you about my work with organizations who are looking to give their teams the autonomy they need in order to be responsive, while also trying to keep things moving in the same direction holistically at the organizational level. And I want to start with a bit of a story. Now, admittedly, it's not going to be turned into a George Lucas or a Peter Jackson epic, but it's still my story, and it's actually from quite a long time ago. And I don't, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't think, hold my hands up, I don't think I realized the importance of this event back then. It's something that I've only really, over the last 5 years or so, and this happened about 15 years ago, and in the last maybe 4 or 5 years that I've really started telling it more and more to people, because it's become a lot more relevant, and I've noticed the importance of it. And it's from a time when I was at a large, it doesn't matter what company I was at, so I don't need to drop them in it, but I was at a large company, let's put it that way. And I was, my history, for what it's worth, I was a project manager before I became a Scrum Master and an Agile coach and so on. And I was part of the team that was responsible for trying to encourage what was called at the time an Agile transformation. And as you can imagine, in a company with over 100,000 people, there were a few that weren't that keen on this Agile thing. And, we were at the vanguard. We were doing something very, very new. We were the first big organization in the UK, probably outside of America, really, that had kind of undergone this level of organizational transformation. And we didn't really know what we were doing. So we were trying to figure it out as we went. And obviously there were some bumps along the road. And one particular bump along the road occurred when one of the lines of business, their project management office, their PMO, had a bit of a panic, shall we say. Their dashboard was just looking less and less pretty. So more and more projects were going from green to amber. More and more projects were going from amber to red. And eventually they called a big meeting. And they said to all the project managers, what's going on? This is not good. This can't continue. We need answers. And the project managers effectively said, we haven't got enough people. We haven't got enough people. To which the PMO said, nice try, but you've actually got more people now than you had 3 months ago, 6 months ago, and things were green then. So that's not really going to fly. And the project manager said, no, fair shout. We do have more people, but we still don't have enough. It turned out that we needed more than we asked for, more than we got. We haven't got the people we need to get these things done. There are more and more risks coming up, more and more issues. So we genuinely don't really know what to do if we can't have more people. So the PMO, within the PMO, there were one or two of these people who, should we say, didn't have a lot of faith in this Agile thing. And this was an opportunity for them to prove that this was not the right way to do things. So they asked us within the Agile team to basically solve the problem. They said, you've been saying Agile is the silver bullet for ages. We haven't been saying that. You've been saying Agile is amazing for ages. So why don't you tell us how you would solve this problem? Now, this was a great opportunity, but we didn't know. We genuinely didn't know how to deal with this. What we did know was that when we had a problem, when we had a question, when we had a challenge, our response was to get a lot of people together in a room with sticky notes and Sharpies. So that's what we did. We got hundreds of people together in a room with loads of sticky notes, loads of Sharpies, loads of caffeinated drinks and pizza. And we said, okay, so how we work in an Agile way is we prioritize and we work on the most important things. So what we're going to do is we're going to find out what our most important project is. And that was interesting. So we basically asked a bunch of senior people to prioritize all of the projects that we had going on. Bear in mind, we had hundreds. And there was a lot of mess, there was a lot of arguing, there was a lot of noise, pizza was thrown around, and eventually someone somewhere said, well, you guys can all shut up, because if my project doesn't work, CEO goes to jail. Okay, there's our priority one. So the next question, now we had our priority one, was who out of all the people in our line of business do we need to get that done? Because that is the most important thing. So people put their hands up. I said, right, all of you people with your hands up, you need to leave now. You cannot be coming to meetings like this because your work is too important. Get out. So they left. And off they went back to work, and we asked the next question, which was, okay, so what is our next most important project? Argue, pizza, eventually someone says something, come to a decision, took a while, very uncomfortable, but we got there. Person, okay, who do we need in this room to get that project done? People put their hands up. Out. But we also need John. Well, you can't have John. He's already working on priority number 1. But you can't have him. Well, what are we going to do? Well, you can have Jeff. We don't want Jeff. Jeff's not as good as John. Well, it's Jeff or nothing. Welcome to the team, Jeff. We love your work. Let's get going. Off we went. But we need Jeff on our project. Sorry, more important. Okay, priority number 3, hands up, go. We need so-and-so, you can't have them. We couldn't even staff half of our projects. Couldn't even staff half of them. We still had people left over in the room, and I felt very, very sorry for them. But we couldn't staff half of our projects. We were pretending that we could. And basically by treating everything as their own little autonomous area, we were putting everything in jeopardy. There was no alignment. There was too much autonomy, not enough alignment, not enough prioritization. So that's my story. Now, why is that relevant to standardized autonomy? Well, for me, the biggest challenge for organizations now is being able to enable autonomy while making sure we're aligned overall at the organizational level. And it's difficult. It's really difficult because we're not used to handling and managing dependencies in a self-managed way. Usually, within our legacy environment, we try and handle these dependencies as infrequently as possible. We try to avoid them, basically, because ultimately they're so painful, they're difficult. And still, quite often in organizations, autonomy either isn't given because we don't really feel that the people we're giving autonomy to will have the ability, will have the confidence, will have the competence to be able to handle that autonomy. Or if it is offered, quite often it's not taken because the people who are being offered the autonomy don't feel confident or competent that we can handle those dependencies, or they genuinely don't trust that that autonomy is there and there's psychological safety to take it on. Potentially, there are so many conflicting priorities, resources, people, that it's really difficult for these people to know how to handle those dependencies and to work in a coordinated, holistic, aligned way. So they generally don't. Now, you might not have heard of the apex predator theory, but this is potentially a huge threat for a lot of organizations that I work with. It was a big threat for the organization I was talking about in that PMO example. Basically, what this theory posits is that the company that achieves the largest market share will inevitably have optimized what they do and how they do it to the existing market conditions. And that makes complete sense. They will have optimized their processes. They'll have become very, very efficient at what they do. And they'll be producing and delivering at high batch and low cost, very, very efficient. And that's great. They'll have streamlined their ways of working based on the current market conditions. And because of that, they won't have much flexibility. They won't have much resilience. They won't have much redundancy built into their work because that would be waste. Okay. Now that's fine until markets change. Because when markets change, those efficiencies actually equate to brittleness. They're very, very fragile to change. Because those processes are so efficient, it's very, very difficult to change them. And that was the case at my organization. We didn't actually see the need to change because we were still making massive profits. Even though we were so dysfunctional, we were still making massive profits. But for lots of organizations, this, yeah, and you have heard of the examples, you know, your Kodaks, your Blockbusters, your Blackberries, so on. Organizations that are effectively sleepwalking into extinction because they've got things that kind of work, so they don't need to change. Yeah, and it's really difficult to make a case for change when things are apparently going well. Once the platform's burning, though, it's too late. Now, it's not a very nice message that I have to give to organizations, but it's the truth. It's a kind of a doomsday scenario, and it's not very easy to believe that message, but there is a positive message that goes along with that. And that is that there is a better, more effective, more coherent way. Now, I want to get a little bit metaphorical with you. Most organizations have been built upon what is now an incoherent, dominant metaphor, and we need to change that. Now, what does that mean? Well, the dominant metaphor that most organizations have been built on is a mechanical metaphor, the idea that you can take a defined set of inputs, process them really nicely, efficiently, and come out with a nice, predictable output at the end. Beautiful, lovely, fantastic. That is awesome when things are stable. Efficiency is brilliant when things are stable and predictable. But, and you will know this more than anyone else, when we're working in a more volatile, uncertain, complex, fast-changing environment, it's not about efficient, repeatable processes. It's about being more effective, because in those conditions, it's not processes that help us deliver value. It's people. It's people who know people, people working with other people influencing other people, these social networks. That's what gets work done. We evolve, we emerge what we're doing to what's needed. It's not about being efficient, it's about being effective. Now, that's what I'm talking about to organizations, about their cultural change from a cultural perspective, from a structural perspective. This is what we call organic agility. Okay, now organic is a framework. Well, technically it's more of a scaffolding, a framework agnostic scaffolding. It doesn't care whether you're doing Scrum or Agile or Waterfall or Kanban or whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's also an acronym, because the aim of organic agility is not to create an agile organization. It's to create a resilient organization, one that is resilient to constant, quite drastic, existential, threatening change. It's with a little a, because it's not even about incorporating the principles of the Agile Manifesto necessarily. So this acronym, creating organizational resilience by growing autonomy and nurturing an interdependent culture. That sense of social networking, that sense of connectedness, that sense of holisticness is this organic agility. And within that approach is this view that the future of scaled Agile is not Agile everywhere, but rather different types of Agile, different levels of Agile throughout the organization. Because the context throughout the organization, especially in a big organization, is going to be very, very different. But those pockets of Agile, they will be interacting harmoniously, and they'll be underpinned by common principles. And one of those common principles that'll be underpinning it is Agile leadership. And when it comes to Agile leadership, I'm not talking about a particular leadership style that you would say that's Agile leadership. Instead, I'm talking about contextually coherent leadership. So taking a different approach to leadership based on the context. And in an organic organization, leadership isn't just restricted to the people in positions of power or hierarchy. It's spread throughout the organization. We all need to be leading in different ways at different times. Now, there are many, many different ways of leading, very many different styles of leadership, and all of them are potentially right and also potentially wrong, depending on the context. And I'm just going to briefly talk you through the most common leadership archetypes that I see within organizations. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the context in which they're appropriate. And then we're going to come back to, so what does this mean for us and standardized autonomy? So here are 5 leadership archetypes. The first one is the expert archetype. Now here, as you can see, on the diagram. You've got the leader who's sitting higher up than everybody else. So more of your traditional leader, probably more from your mechanical metaphor, right? This is somebody who's in charge, someone who's in control, someone who's telling people what needs to be done. They're often telling them how it needs to be done as well. They're paying very close attention to whether it is done, whether it's done properly. And all the communication you can see is represented by these arrows between the little icons. It happens with and between and through the leader. Okay, that leader is in position because of their functional or technical expertise, hence the name expert archetype. Basically, they know more than anybody else. So their judgment is sounder than anybody else's. Why would anybody else challenge that? It makes sense to people within this archetype because they know that they know more than they know. You know what I mean? So these people, they don't need to collaborate. They don't need to work together. They don't need to innovate. They don't even need to feel like a team because there's someone in charge. They know what needs to be done. They're just going to wait and be told what to do and do it, and everything will be fine. It's not good. It's not bad. It's not right. It's not wrong. Okay. It's contextually appropriate in certain circumstances. And that's the key. That's the first archetype. The second one is a coordinator archetype. So you can see here, there's a lot more in the middle than at the top. Okay, so they're key cog in what's going on. A lot of the communication is still going through them, and they're still responsible for organizing people, hence the coordinator archetype, to make sure that we're delivering value overall. Now, people being people, the fact that there's a little bit more interaction, shall we say, between people than in the expert archetype means there's probably going to be a little bit more conflict, all right? And the leader will take responsibility for making sure that gets resolved. And we can't just rely solely on the expert anymore. So you see a little bit of communication, a little bit of interaction, a little bit of perhaps even cooperation and collaboration, maybe a little bit of self-organization, a little bit, not much, but enough that some conflict might emerge and that the leader's not involved in everything. So because there's a little bit more engagement, there's a little bit more of a sense of team, but there's still really a group of functional experts, individual silos, if you like. Silos that are coordinated by that leader. It's not good, not bad, not right, not wrong, just a different archetype coherent for a different set of circumstances. And the third archetype is referred to as the peer archetype. So you can see here someone who's kind of on the same level, right? They've got about as much communication with other people as everybody else. There's a lot more participatory decision-making going on here a little bit. You know, everybody's talking to everyone. This leader is now just one of the team, not seen as the traditional leader telling us what to do. They might still be a little bit like that, especially if they've evolved from the coordinator archetype. They might have a little bit of leftover responsibility, perhaps maybe even authority that's been carried over. But generally speaking, the majority of the communication now is happening outside of direct contact with the leader. There's more communication happening that doesn't involve the leader than does. So you're naturally going to see more of a team. You're going to start seeing some collaboration. You might even see some shared decision making. And the leader's okay with that because the level of expertise is a lot flatter. The level of hierarchy and authority is a lot flatter. And from a leadership perspective, this person isn't telling people what to do anymore. Instead, this person is probably more likely giving them intent and then helping either create or at least give a sense of purpose. Probably some shared goals coming into this. And I'm really now going to be faced with the possibility of this phrase, which I'll come back to in a little bit of time. I'm faced with this prospect of motivational debt. Okay. So if on the face of it, I give the team authority to make a decision, but then I come back in and I veto that or undermine that, then that's going to lead to huge amounts of demotivation or motivational debt. So I'll come back to that later. But those are our first three archetypes. Our fourth archetype is the coach. Now you can see here they're another step removed, and literally in this case removed from the team. They're positioning themselves outside of the team, and the team view them as outside of the team. This team now is very much managing itself. The role of the leader here in the coach archetype very much focused on two things, really. Coaching, so coaching individuals, coaching the team, coaching the system, and strategy. So the actual operational work doesn't need to be sanctioned or directed by the leader. That's very much autonomously done. as long as it's working towards the overall strategy, and that's where that leader comes in. So where are we in the where are we in the big picture? Where are the boundaries to this team self-organization? Where are they bumping up against them? Those types of things. What do the team need to be more autonomous, more productive, more effective? And the fifth archetype, if you're going to follow, it could be seen as a progression, right? You could make your way from this traditional expert archetype. If you're based in a very mechanical metaphor world, you might see gradual change because people don't like radical change. So you might see coordinators, not too much of a big shift. We can easily make that change and then maybe move to a peer. It doesn't have to be that linear, but it's quite normal to see that. And this strategist archetype could be in that context, your nirvana, I suppose, your ultimate perspective, because you've got everybody now who's yellow. So you've got full shared leadership now. It's not just shared decision making, but shared leadership. And this team is so self-organizing. They're not just self-organizing within the boundaries of their team. They're starting to self-organize in the context of the bigger picture, the organizational strategy. They're getting involved in the organizational strategy now. And so the leadership that the leader is providing is very, very different now. Okay, it's based on what the team need. It's very fluid. Okay, hard to pin down and define because the team are defining that themselves. Now, I mentioned this term, motivational debt. I actually quite like it. And you might not have used the phrase yourself yet. You might not have even heard it yourself, but you've probably experienced it. All right. So I'll give you a definition first of all. It's up on the screen here. And you've probably heard of technical debt. Okay. And it's a similar kind of concept because technical debt isn't very tangible. You can't necessarily see it that easily, but you can find it. You can kind of measure it. Motivational debt is similar because, well, I'll give you a couple of examples. Okay. So, and this is real examples that I see quite often. You might have even seen this. First one, leadership comes along and says, right, we're going to do Agile. We're going to be self-organizing. And this is how you're going to self-organize. Okay, you're going to do this. You're going to do this. No, you can't do that. No, not like that. You're going to do it like this. And you're going to do it like this. And you're going to do that sense of being cut off at the knees, if you like. Now, interestingly anyway, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But once autonomy has been offered and it hasn't been followed up on, that's a huge demotivator. Equally, another example of motivational debt is when leadership come along and say, okay, we're going to do Agile, and Agile is all about self-organization. So we're just going to get out of your way and it's over to you. Off you go. And the team think, whoa, what? What do we do? We haven't done this before. We don't know what we're going to do. And they haven't got that sense of confidence, that sense of competence, that sense of experience to actually be able to take that autonomy that's being offered. They just feel like they're being thrown in the deep end and abandoned. But again, that's not a bad approach in the right context. So you can imagine, I'm sure you can imagine a situation where you've got a really experienced, confident, competent team who would be crying out for a leadership to get out of the way and say, over to you. But equally, I'm sure you can imagine a team that's pretty inexperienced, quite nervous, not really sure how to self-manage. They have the skills for that. And they like the idea of Agile, but what they really want is someone to come in and say, this is how we're going to start. And ultimately, we're going to strip a lot of this process and stuff out of the way over time. Right now, just do this and it'll be okay. And trust me, and we're going to evolve it. They would love that. So it's not right or wrong. It's assessing the context. It's meeting the team, meeting the people where they are based on what they need, and trying to avoid motivational debt. So a lot of my job these days is helping leaders avoid motivational debt. And part of that is helping them get a handle on their culture. Okay. Now, just like technical debt, just like motivational debt, culture is quite a difficult thing to define. It's quite a difficult thing to put your finger on, right? And really create a concrete definition of, measure. But if you could, that would be useful, wouldn't it? I think so. I believe every organization, every department, every team has their own culture. And those cultures are quite what you call tacit, unspoken, but also sticky. Okay. Now, what I mean by sticky is they last. You know that analogy of the rubber band, you can stretch it, but it always comes back to where it was. I think that's quite similar with cultures. Cultures are very sticky. And part of the stickiness is the stories that we tell. Now, my personal definition of culture is it's the collection of stories that we tell about what works and what doesn't work within our organizations. You know, what's expected, what's tolerated, what's valued, what's recognized. Now, I don't necessarily think there's a right or a wrong culture. Obviously, there are toxic cultures, but there are lots of potentially right cultures, and those potentially right cultures could also be the wrong culture in other circumstances. That's what I mean. So just like there's not a right or wrong leadership style, I think there is a culture that's coherent for your context. Okay, so the challenges that you face, there's a culture for that, and there are many other cultures that wouldn't be appropriate for the challenges that you're facing. I also believe that culture is constantly in flux. People, so even though I've described it as that rubber band, okay, it's constantly evolving because culture is effectively the result of the interaction of our people, our behaviors, our rewards, our punishments, our successes, our failures, all of those things that are changing on a continual basis. So our culture is slowly but continually changing. Whenever a new person joins the organization, our culture changes slightly. Yes, we change them also, but they also change us a little bit. When people leave, it changes. Whenever we get new stories of success based on a different way of working, that alters our culture. So one of the things I try and do is help organizations find and then visualize their culture. Now, these are examples of visualizations of a culture, okay? Different types of culture. Now, what do those shapes mean? Well, I'll briefly explain to you in a very short amount of time that those shapes are based on what's called the competing values framework, which I didn't come up with. I'm not that clever. But the CVF, the competing values framework, comes up with, or identifies rather, 4 major characteristics of organizational culture. And those characteristics can be used to measure and interact with an organizational culture. Now, those 4 characteristics are leadership style or behavior, orientation to work, the theory of effectiveness, and value drivers. Okay, so leadership style or behavior. What that means is how leadership respond to certain circumstances or contexts or situations, how leadership respond to certain circumstances. Our orientation to work, okay, that's our second characteristic, and that is how we define, how we assign, how we execute, how we track our work. And then we've got our theory of effectiveness, which is ultimately the underlying definition of success within the organization, how we judge success in our organization. And then finally, our value drivers is what motivates our people to work, not just work, but work well, okay, within our organizational culture. Now, those characteristics are not unique to the competing values framework, obviously, but what's quite powerful is the concept of tension across 2 different dimensions. So the first one is whether the culture is either internally focused or externally focused. And the second dimension is the degree to which the culture strives for standardization and control compared to aiming for flexibility, autonomy, diversification, individuality, that kind of thing. So by those two dimensions crossing, we get a 4-quadrant model, which you can see on the screen here, with 4 different culture stems. So starting in the bottom left, that red quadrant, that's the control stem. And there you've got very strong internal focus, so very much focused on what's going on internally within the organization, but also a drive for standardization. And you see things like hierarchy and doing things right, okay. Collaboration is our yellow top left cultural stem. So we're still internally focused, but we're a lot more flexible on and diverse and bespoke around how we do things. The create culture, the green one in the top right, is geared towards diversification, but in contrast has an external focus. And then finally our compete in the bottom right, the blue, is a combination of an external focus and a drive for standardization. Now, they're not right or wrong, okay? And actually, as an organization, you're not going to be in one of those quadrants, for example. That's where these shapes come in. So if you saw a shape, something along the lines of that, more often than not, that would be quite representative of a traditional organization, one with a more mechanical dominant metaphor. And something a little bit like that would be indicative of something that's a little bit more organic, if you like, more agile. All right. So there's a different spread throughout your organization across these 4 culture stems. Now, that's not too important, all right? But in terms of getting a picture of our culture, that's quite powerful. And the first step that I would take with an organization is to help get a consistent picture of our organizational culture. More often than not, people have different interpretations of our organizational culture. And until we can overlay things one-on-one, we can't see the differences of interpretation. And ultimately what happens when people think different things is they act very differently, which brings me on nicely to my pyramid of results. Again, not my pyramid of results, can't claim credit for that. But this pyramid I find really interesting because it kind of challenges someone that we all consider to be pretty clever. Einstein, generally considered to be a genius. I'm not going to challenge him myself. But one of the things that Einstein famously said was insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So if we're to follow that logic, if I see bad results, I should change my actions. Unfortunately, though, when we're in a complex space, the link between cause and effect isn't very clear. There can be many, many different reasons for why my actions are or are not contributing to or causing the results. So I could potentially do exactly the same thing and get different actions because of the complexity of the environment I'm in, the unknown variables, the unknown correlation between those variables. Equally, I could do very, very different things and still get the same results. So changing actions is no guarantee of changing results. That's a problem. We can't just rely on saying, okay, if you do this and get this, then do that. Can't do that. Too simplistic. So in order for us to get autonomy, we need people to be able to do different things based on their context and their context based on the challenges. But in order for us to get standardization, we need commonality. And if we can't standardize at the level of actions, because we can't be certain that if we do this, then this will happen, we need to look deeper than that. So that line, that red line that's cutting that pyramid in half, not technically half, but you know what I mean. Everything above that line is quite visible. Okay, I can see results and I can see actions. I can see what people are doing. I can see what people are not doing. But what's under that line is less visible. All right. But I would argue, in our context, more important. There, underneath that line, we see beliefs. Now, it's our beliefs that are what cause us to take actions. So I will take a certain action because of what I believe to be right, what I believe to be desirable, what I believe will be appreciated and recognized and rewarded, ultimately expected within our culture. Now, I can't see those beliefs, but they're causing our actions. Now, if I have a different set of beliefs to somebody else, then the same situation is going to lead us to take different actions. But if we have similar beliefs, then we can appreciate similar situations and act appropriately without having to standardize the actions. But how do you go about standardizing beliefs? Sounds a little bit Machiavellian. So it might still be too high level. So this pyramid suggests that actually our beliefs are built and reinforced based on experiences. So I do something based on a belief. Now, if that belief is proven to be correct, then that belief will be reinforced. But if I do something believing that it will get this response from somebody I respect, or somebody who has control over my bonus or promotion chances or what have you, and it doesn't happen, or something different happens, then I might change my beliefs. So as leaders, if we want to standardize without standardizing actions, then we need to create and reinforce experiences that encourage consistent beliefs. Beliefs about what's possible, beliefs about what's valued, beliefs about what's expected. And that is a very difficult thing to do. Not impossible, but it's very difficult. And one of the reasons it's very difficult is because it requires trust. We are granting autonomy. We are trusting that people will do good things. We are trusting that people are capable, are good. And trust is a valuable commodity in a complex environment. You can equate trust to an environment of psychological safety. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on trust, because ultimately that's something that only really works well in small groups in a more private scenario, not in an environment like this where I can't even see any of you. But if you do want to increase the levels of trust that people have in you, then this trust triangle talks about three different variables. Are you authentic? Are you being yourself? Do people see you as being authentic? Do you have good logic? You're able to explain yourself understandably, and do you seem solid and capable? But also the third aspect is, can you empathize with their position? Now, in my experience, this is usually the point where trust falls first. It's that lack of empathy. We see what we need from other people, what we need them to do, how we want them to change. And we often see the problem as being with other people. Now, that's no judgment on any of you, it's human nature. Empathizing with others in the situation they're in, assuming that they want a positive result as well, doesn't come naturally. So this is usually the best place to start if you want to increase trust. Now, the other aspect of trust that I want to bring up is that trust isn't binary. Okay. There are different levels of trust. Even if you made a list of all the people you trust, there will be some people on that list that you trusted more than others, and in different contexts. So I might trust you to drive my new car, but I might not trust you to look after my newborn baby, or the other way around. So this bottom continuum, this bottom spectrum, if you like, is saying, well, at one end you've got distrust, and actually there are different levels of distrust as well, right? But for another matter. Then we might have rules-based trust. Now, rules-based trust is basically saying, well, there is enough deterrence. I've got enough coverage, whether it's laws, contracts, things like that, that if you do screw me over, then I've got protection or comeback, all right? So that rules-based trust. It is trust. It's not very deep trust, but it is trust. Deeper than that is competence-based trust, which is pretty much what it sounds like, right? If we work together enough, I've seen you in action, as it were, then I know that you're capable. So I can trust you a little bit more. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be okay. You're not going to let me down. I know you're pretty good at it. Good as a person as well, but mostly good at what you do. And then you've got identity-based trust. Now, this is the deepest form of trust. This is effectively saying, I know what you value. I've seen you in tough situations, and I know what you really like, how you really respond under pressure. I know that you know my weaknesses, and you've chosen not to exploit them. So I know I can trust you as a person, regardless of your competence, even at times. Now, you don't need to have identity-based trust with everyone you work with, okay? Maybe rules-based trust is enough. Maybe competence-based trust is enough. The point is, I don't see people and teams having that level of conversation, having that explicit, open discussion about levels of trust to help us standardize our experiences and beliefs so that we can cope with uncertainty. Okay, I'm sort of wrapping up now. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my calls for action. Now, one thing I really want you to bear in mind is that too many people look at what other people need to do. That team over there needs to change. That colleague over there needs to do something different. The management over here needs to change. And the first thing to say about that is if you're looking for any kind of change, if you want to make things better in any kind of way, the person you have most control over, the most influence over, is the person you see in the mirror. So even though Gandhi didn't actually say, be the change you want to see in the world, it's still a pretty good quote, because trust has to start somewhere. So, okay, maybe you're going to call me naive here. It wouldn't be the worst thing I've been called, it wouldn't be the first time. But I genuinely believe that everyone, even your bosses, are acting with some level of rational thinking and some level of good intentions. So the first thing I want you to do is, when you're looking at your organization, when you're calling out for greater autonomy, or you want some other team or other person to do something different to allow you to be more effective, I want you to ask yourself, are you doing everything that you can to deserve that level of autonomy, or to deserve that help that you think you need? Now, you've built some level of trust already, so you're not starting from scratch. I encourage you to start from that point. Okay, don't think you have to start from scratch, but this is important. Okay, be the change, role model this. This is an influential act, and I know it's difficult for a lot of people. It's very, very difficult to imagine this kind of change, this kind of self-organization, if you like, at an organizational level, but it is possible. Now, most organizations out there think it's a choice between organizational alignment or greater autonomy. I'm here to tell you it's not a choice. It's a false dichotomy. And believe me, if it's possible at some of the companies that I've been at, then it's got to be possible for you as well. Is it easy? No. Is it messy, noisy? Yes. But is it more rewarding? Absolutely. Now, this is a picture of a group that had over 350 projects running in parallel across various departments, various teams. And they reorganized. Okay, they created a space. They visualized what they were doing. They got together on a regular basis. They looked outside of their bubble. They started reorganizing visually around value streams. It is possible. Now, you can do it if you have some conversations about what you're expecting of each other, the different teams that are interacting with one another. Are you prepared to commit to what they need in order to be successful? Maybe you need to reorganize. Okay, these are quite common questions. So my next challenge is to think outside your bubble. Okay, you are part of a system. What is the system or systems that you're part of? The human systems that you're part of, or the human systems that you impact. And what impact do you have on other teams, on other parts of the system? And what other parts of the system are having a big impact on you? So map it out. It doesn't have to be particularly fancy. You could do a really fancy organizational network analysis diagram, or you could just do something like this. And be willing to ask yourself, what am I prepared to do? What are we prepared to do to help improve the system? Not just us, the system. Ask yourself, what expectations have you got of the other teams that you're interacting with? What expectations do they have of us? Are we aligned on that? Is there potentially some motivational debt somewhere in the gaps? So that's the next challenge. Think outside your bubble, and then standardize your autonomy. I want you to think about the bigger picture, the bigger customer. All right, be curious about what's needed to serve that bigger customer, not just to do your thing. I don't want you to think about internal customers here. I want you to be curious about your team's culture, how it's perceived by other people, other teams. I want you to be curious about the interfacing culture that you have with other teams. Okay, be curious about what other people, other teams need, what they're expecting from you. I want you to look at the system and simplify it. Now, leadership is another thing. I said this before, that leadership should be spread throughout the organization, but that doesn't happen naturally. You need to make it happen, okay? You need to make it happen by stepping up and providing leadership. You don't wait for other people to do this. Now that's scary for a lot of organizations, but it's the organizations that have people courageous enough to trust themselves, to be trustworthy, and trust each other internally, to volunteer redundancy, to put the system above the team, to become teams of teams. Okay, they're the organizations that are going to succeed. They're the organizations that are going to thrive. And while you're doing this, what's really, really important is to share stories of your successes and your failures, but not just on their own. Share the stories in the context. So we did this in this context and it worked. We did this in this context and it didn't work. Okay. And build that shared library of new stories, effectively the new culture that you're creating within your organization, and then regularly inspect and adapt it, celebrate it. So that's it. I believe I've got 10 minutes left. Some questions. So I will hand back and ask you, what do you have to ask me?
Okay, everyone. Okay, guys, there is this is a time for some questions for Jeff. And well, Jeff, hello. We have you online,
Hey.
so that's great. Perfect. I have a lot of questions after your talk. It was really enlightening. So thank you for that. I will be starting out though from one question which Eva Koprovska asked right now on our Slack channel. So anyone, if you have more questions for Jeff, please let us know via the Slack channel. And the question for you was, well, what if the cultural profile is contradictory elements, right? So what if some people from our management have that, you know, that rigid cultural style, to hierarchical one, and below it's different, like people have a different style, and it's not permitted to talk about it. What do you do about it then in an organization, right? How to talk about that?
Yeah. So the interesting part there for me was if you're not permitted to talk about it, because any kind of collaboration requires people to talk, and it needs people to talk about some vulnerabilities, if you like, and we need to be vulnerable with each other. So it doesn't necessarily matter that people have got different default archetypes. The point is not that each person has one way of leading. We need to be more flexible in the leadership approach that we're taking based on the context. And so I might be adopting one of those 5 archetypes with one person and a different archetype with somebody else, because that's where they are, that's the challenges they're facing. So if I've got people at one level of the organization that have a certain default, that's okay, as long as they can flex, as long as they can try different things. And the conversation isn't necessarily about my particular strengths or weaknesses. It's about what we each need in order to be successful, what the environment needs for us to be successful, and then how do I play my part in creating and sustaining that environment. And the conversation effectively happens around the stories that we tell. So they're happening. Those conversations are happening, whether they're happening in the office or on, actually within the people themselves, or they're happening informally in Slack channels or WhatsApp groups or in the pub or what have you. These conversations are happening. These stories are being told. We just want to have them a little bit more close to the surface, because without that transparency, we can't inspect and adapt.
Okay, thanks. So right, but you know, it's still, I have the question, right? What remains with me is we have the different ways we're thinking. We will have the leadership which is talking down to people, and well, how can we as change agents have the access to them and help them work through their beliefs, right? show them what works, what works down there and what doesn't, or how do you do that?
Slowly and from wherever you are. So how do you get access to different people? That's going to be different based on the context and the culture as well, right? But I will have access to some people, and some people may have access to other people. So I talked about that sort of organizational network diagram. You can take that down to a much more individual level and say, well, who do I have access to? Who do I have influence over? Who does listen to me? And who do they have access to? Who's in their network? And whether it be through individual conversations, whether it be through trying to get a space at a leadership monthly meeting, whether it be through publishing an article and seeing if we can get it shared within our internal network, whether it be through creating a video and sending it out to some of the teams and seeing if it gets picked up. There'll be different tactics to get access to different people, but people, generally speaking, will only listen to me if they've got something to gain. Why would anybody spend the time to have a conversation with me unless they have something to gain? And they're more likely to have a conversation with me if it's seen as for their benefit rather than for my benefit. And one of the things I was sort of touching on towards the end quite strongly is, and it's normal human nature. It's very, very normal to think, well, these people need to change. And that's the message I'm giving out. I have some knowledge that you need to know so that you can do your job better. You need to change. And no one really wants to hear that. So thinking about the message that we're giving, but also the sort of underlying message, if you like, the unspoken message. How is this coming across? Is it seen as me telling them they need to do something different? The idea that the phrase that almost like a false because, if you like, we need to give people the opportunity to change what they're doing without looking like they're losing face. So giving people the opportunity to do something better for them without the having to look like they're backing down or changing their minds, or in their minds admitting that they were doing something wrong previously.
Right. Okay. I think that coincides very nicely with a conversation I see happening on the Slack channel. And it's basically about experience versus beliefs. There's Małgorzata who's saying that, she doesn't agree to the ideas that you can change beliefs, that we need to work on the experience level, is that beliefs are something deeper. It's a belief on influence on our experience, how we interpret it, right? So if we believe something, it will influence on how we interpret the experience, right? Yeah. Isn't it a bit a chicken and egg problem, right? So how do you get out of that? Because we would like to share with people some experiences which can help them reevaluate their beliefs, but they're still looking through their own beliefs lens. Like, that's a question. Maybe my beliefs are wrong in this particular context, right? Maybe we don't need to be organic, we need to be mechanistic, and then everything will be fine, right? Yeah. So how do we work with that as change agents, as people who want to change something?
It's a really, really good point. It's a really good point, because we do see the world through our lens. We can only see the world through our lens, but what we can do is we can help people realize that we are seeing the world through our own lens. And a lot of that is unconscious. We don't realize that we are seeing something as we see it. A lot of us, unless we actually take time to think, all right, somebody else could be seeing exactly the same thing as me and viewing it very, very differently. So this phrase of intellectual humility is quite an interesting one, of basically saying, well, I believe this, but I might be wrong. And if we can all get into the habit of that, then we become curious. We have the opportunity to develop empathy. We have the opportunity to consider things from a different perspective and be a little bit more objective. So cognitive biases are epidemic. They are everywhere. We have loads of them. Okay. The first step to becoming a little bit more objective, a little bit more neutral, a little bit more real, if you like, is just to be aware that we are all suffering from cognitive biases. And if we can have that conversation, that it's normal, that we can kind of laugh about it, if you like, then we can start having a slightly less polarized debate and conversation.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You know what? Something that's that you're saying is triggering in me. That, like, okay, I can, I can be the change I want, right? I can be intellectually humble and try to say that, well, I have a lot of biases, right? And the first thing I'm afraid of in that scenario is, if I'm not that, confident, strong type in the typical mechanistic organization, it'll be seen as, yeah, you know nothing, and you are admitting it freely, right? So does that kind of modeling work, or do you need to do something else, right? How do you do that? Be intellectually humble at the same time, not presenting as weak and to be dismissed in a mechanistic organization.
That's a really good point as well, because it is actually quite an unconscious fear that people have about admitting their lack of knowledge. But what we see, there are a couple of things here. Is if I can just pick out something you said there, was admitting that I don't know anything. Well, that's not what I'm admitting. I'm admitting that I don't know this, or I'm not sure if this is right. So I can have a suspicion, I can have a hypothesis, but my attempt is to try and prove or disprove that hypothesis. It's to allow the information to emerge from a complex environment, rather than try and predict something and see if I can make that prediction come true. So it's take a very scientific approach, a very empirical approach to my knowledge gathering. So yes, I know this, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I know this, I know this, I don't know this. I'm going to test that. So that's the first thing. It's not admitting I don't know anything, but that is a very, very, it's a sort of something that we might laugh at, but that actually is something that we might think to ourselves. If I'm admitting I don't know something, people are going to think I don't know anything.
Yeah.
That's not true, but it is an assumption we're making. The second thing is that role modeling does free up a lot of people, and it does have to start somewhere. All right, it has to start somewhere. Someone admitting, I'm not quite sure I know the answer to this one, or maybe there isn't a right answer to this one, or what we've been doing in the past might not work now. All right, that's a really uncomfortable step to take. But once somebody takes that step, it becomes okay to start that conversation. It becomes okay for other people to say, okay, well, yeah, all right, I've got an idea on this one. I might be wrong. No idea about this bit. Pretty sure about this one. We can start focusing our energies in the right area, because until we do, we just become anxious about everything, and we try and tie down things that can't be tied down.
So basically work within your area of competence, where you know you're right, within your zone of influence or control, right? And expand that, basically. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Okay. Another question from our public, from Pavel, is a bit from the left field, but related to the autonomy versus standardization question. In the current state, we have COVID. We moved to work from home, right? People really love working from home for multiple reasons, but organizations say that's not effective. You need to go back to the office, like Google saying you need to go back to the premises, right? So what is it? Is it risk or opportunity for organizations? What's happened right now?
So my view on this, and I don't think it's necessarily changed over the last 18 months, actually, is that this has really shone a spotlight on the organizations that had trust built into their hiring processes and their working processes. Because organizations that didn't trust the people that they had hired really struggled with this working from home, because the lack of oversight, the lack of being able to be on top of everything, it was just magnified. But organizations who did have trust in their people, and they had hired because they'd hired the people that they knew they could trust, they've really accelerated. They've actually taken this and separated themselves from other people. So you've got a lot of different organizations thinking, well, how are we going to handle this? Do we actually take advantage of this and say, well, we know now that we believed we could trust them. We now have proof that we can trust people, right? Empirical proof, because actually things have got better in some cases because of the flexibility. So do we dial that up even more? Do we try and take advantage of that even more? Or do we try and find something in the middle ground? And other people saying, well, we can't handle that. I knew we couldn't trust people. This has proven that we couldn't trust people. We all need to get back into the office. Now, there's usually something underpinning a lot of those thoughts anyway. But what I'm starting to see over here, certainly, is a lot of people changing organizations. So there's actually, in the UK, I don't know about everywhere else, but there's a lot of people saying, well, I've experienced this now. My leadership have really shown their true colors. Not an organization I want to work for. There's actually quite a bit of demand for what I do right now. I'm going to go and find an organization that matches my values and gives me the opportunity to excel and work how I work best. And it's kind of the employers are not in the strongest position here, so people can move around. And I'm seeing that a lot, and it's going to take time for the dust to settle a bit, things to settle down, especially as we start seeing this sort of more hybrid working and companies finding their middle ground, and it's going to be a bit of trial and error. But yeah, for me, it all comes back to that element of trust. It really amplified. Before you could kind of get away with that. Yeah, we trust you. Yeah, we trust you. Yeah, because we didn't really have to that much. Now, the last 18 months, we've had to.
Right. Just writing down something from the chat. Thank you very much for that reply. I completely agree with what you're saying. Companies show their true colors, and we can decide where we're working, right? So we decide if we choose somebody who trusts in us or someone who doesn't. There was one. Well, it wasn't a question that was actively asked, but it was a reply to Eva Koprovska's quotation of your think outside your bubble, right? And somebody responded with, Monica responded with, how can you think outside of your bubble if you don't have the experience needed, right? If you haven't seen what's outside your bubble, how do you do that?
Well, the first thing is just to start creating that picture. So you'll never have a complete picture of all of the interactions that you have, but just by starting the process will lead you to asking some questions. Okay, so what's going on over here? All right, I know we interact with these people quite a lot, but where do they get their information from? And they seem to have some other things that are going on that's really affecting them. What's going on over here? And this curiosity will lead to this picture growing over time. And it will change because people move around and teams change and people get hired and so on. So don't expect it to be a static picture. The process of asking those questions, though, of, okay, we're working with you. You have a really big influence on what we're doing here right now. What's driving you? What are your goals? What are your barriers? What are your impediments? What are your beliefs? What are your experiences? Those kinds of conversations, even if it's an incomplete picture, then you don't need to have expertise. This is the point. It's about being curious. It's about building those relationships and building that picture. Not thinking, I know what the picture is in my head, I just need to put it on paper. Let's find out what it is and let your curiosity drive you.
Cool. Well, you can write down the picture from your head, but then
sure,
just test it against reality. Is that right? Yeah. Definitely. So we are here during Agile by Example. It's the N+1 conference. We have a lot of people who are veteran agilists, who are very new agilists. Do you have any recommendations for those guys, for all those people who usually thrived on interpersonal relationships? How do you survive during COVID when you don't have the real interactions? Like, we're trying to emulate it with Gather, for example, but how do you do that?
I quite like the Gather thing, by the way. I quite like wandering around and the sort of spatial thing, getting closer to people and having conversations with them. The tools are catching up, right? It takes a little bit of time, but the tools are catching up. How to cope if you're a little bit more of an extrovert and you gain energy from other people is effectively what I'm hearing from the question there. And I didn't realize that I had as much of a need for that as I do when this started. My instant reaction was actually great, because often I find myself, if I'm in a group setting, quite low on energy by the end of the day. But in one-on-one settings, I'm usually more energized by the end of the day. So that was my initial thought, but actually I found myself craving more group collaboration again the longer this has gone on. So finding different ways to do that, whether that be so in my case, coming along to little things like this or meetup groups. I've, for example, created my own community where we could have little sessions on a weekly basis, monthly basis, 6, 7, 8, maybe 15 people, something like that, to have just conversations, informal conversations. We had someone turn up and play some music and just have a couple of drinks together. So I found my way of getting some kind of balance. but also being quite open about, well, I'm kind of missing that today, you know. One of the core protocols that I used to like, even when we were in
Hmm.
person, was the check-in.
Yeah,
So, you know, how am I feeling today? You know, well, I'm quite low on energy. I'm kind of missing some interaction. My work looks like it's going to be quite individual for the day. And I picked up a technique from. It's actually a productivity tip that I picked up from a guy called James Clear. I can't remember the name of what he called the technique, but basically logging on to a Zoom call or whatever with somebody else, telling each other what you're going to be working on for the next 30 minutes, and just staying on the call but on mute, and then doing that thing, and then at the end of that time box, just checking in, seeing how things went, just telling each other how you got on. And it introduced a sense of accountability, but also a sense of togetherness without actually
cool.
disturbing each other. You weren't necessarily working on the same thing. And I quite like that. Just that worked for me, but it's got to be something that works for all of you, right? So my general advice is try something. Tell people
Hmm.
what you need and try something to see if it works, and then inspect and adapt.
Cool. Okay, we are coming up to the to the end of our time here. I have 3 more questions from Slack. Short
Okay.
answers, short answers,
All right.
answers only, even if it's hard. So okay, the first question is about the strategy. How do you process that from the C level to the team level? How do you do that? How do you work with that? And you have 1 sentence to answer that.
Be transparent and have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Okay. Second one, how to build trust in a remote environment, how to encourage people to build relationships. You said
Share
something about that
something.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, share something and work with somebody on something. Trust is built through delivery.
Trust is built. I like that. Okay, cool. And the third one, this one is a bit bigger. Coming back to cultural profiles, I don't think cultural matter is the biggest issue and deserves that much attention at the end of the day. Your culture and beliefs should be active at your own habitats, right? For home, family, friends. While in the corporational environment, you should contribute to the common goal and the company culture. Isn't that the core of professionalism? What would you answer to that?
So what was the question? Is
Yeah,
culture only relevant outside of the work context? Was it?
kind of, right? Yeah. So your culture should be outside of the company. In the company, you should be part of that culture, which is in the company, and that's it. You should, you know.
So I think it's not a very short answer, so maybe you have to cut me off. I don't know. But family, yes, within our family we have our ways of things that work and our ways of things that don't work. In my group of friends, we have a slightly different culture to my family. We have a way accepted ways that things work and accepted ways that things don't work. And in my work environment, it's different again. But it's all based on the stories. And in each of those environments, in each of those cultures, I need to give away a little bit of myself for the common good. And the principles are exactly the same. And I think I can be part of multiple different communities and multiple different cultures at the same time.
Hmm. I think that answers it very, very nicely.
Okay,
So, thank you very much, Jeff.
no problem. Thanks for all the questions,
Uh,
everyone.
yeah, and you have one more question for everyone, right? We have like 15 minutes until the end of the
Yes.
session, and then we'll have a 5-minute break before the next sessions. But you had one important question for everyone to discuss, right? So
Yeah.
the question is, discuss in small groups how you can be the change within your organization. I think it ties in very nicely with your presentation, right?
Yeah.
So everyone, the task is, if you take a look at the room, if you follow me, actually down there, okay, I'll be a ghost. Downstairs, you'll see there are boxes, right? There are private rooms. The last 15 minutes of this conversation, I will ask you to go into those boxes and discuss with other people for 15 minutes the question which Jeff has put in front of us. Discuss in small groups how you can be the change within your organization, right?
Yeah.
So
Try
I'm
and
inviting
forget
you.
all the things that other people need to do. What can you do to
You
start the change within your organization?
start with you, right? That's a new alphabet. Thank you very much, Jeff.